The sun hung high in the sky, casting a golden glow over Lake Michigan. It was one of those perfect summer days where the air felt warm, but not too hot, and a soft breeze carried the scent of sunscreen and salt water. Families lounged on colorful towels, children built sandcastles near the shoreline, and couples strolled hand in hand along the water's edge. The beach was alive with laughter, music, and the rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the shore. Emily Dawson sat cross-legged on her beach towel, sipping a cold glass of lemonade she had bought from a nearby stand. She wasn't usually one for crowded places, but today, she decided to take advantage of her rare day off. A nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, Emily worked long hours under stressful conditions, so weekends like this were precious. Her phone lay face down beside her, untouched, as she watched the world go by. For once, she didn't feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Not far away, Daniel Carter stood ankle-deep in the lake, marveling at how different it looked compared to the rivers back home in Texas. This was his first trip to Chicago, and he couldn't wait to explore everything the city had to offer. He had already visited the famous Cloud Gate sculpture, better known as the Bean, and wandered through Millennium Park earlier that morning. Now he wanted nothing more than to relax by the water before heading back to his hotel later that evening. Daniel waded further into the lake, letting the cool water lap against his legs. He glanced around at the other swimmers splashing and laughing nearby. Everything seemed peaceful, almost idyllic. But unbeknownst to him, danger lurked beneath the surface. The currents here could be unpredictable, especially for someone unfamiliar with them. What started as a refreshing dip quickly turned into something much more serious. Back on the sand, Emily noticed a group of people gathering near the water. At first, she thought they were just watching a child play or maybe cheering on a particularly skilled swimmer. But then she saw it, a man lying motionless on the wet sand, surrounded by frantic onlookers. Without thinking twice, Emily jumped to her feet, leaving her lemonade behind as she sprinted toward the scene. As she approached, the crowd parted slightly to let her through. On the ground lay Daniel, his skin pale, and his lips tinged blue. Someone shouted that he had been pulled out of the water moments ago after struggling to stay afloat. Another person tried to shake him awake, but there was no response. Panic rippled through the bystanders, their voices rising in fear and confusion. Emily knelt beside Daniel, her training kicking in immediately. She checked for a pulse, weak, thready, and confirmed that he wasn't breathing. Time seemed to slow as she positioned her hands over his chest and began performing CPR. Pushing hard and fast, she counted aloud to maintain the proper rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Each compression felt urgent, each second ticking away like a countdown. The crowd grew silent except for the occasional gasp or murmur. Some people filmed the rescue attempt on their phones, while others called 911, relaying information to the dispatcher. Parents shielded their children's eyes and friends hugged each other tightly, praying for a miracle. Emily blocked all of this out, focusing solely on the task at hand. She tilted Daniel's head back to open his airway and delivered 2 quick breaths before resuming chest compressions. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Sweat dripped down Emily's face as she continued tirelessly, her arms burning with exertion. Still, she refused to stop. Somewhere deep inside, she knew she couldn't give up, not when there was even the slightest chance of saving his life. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Daniel coughed violently, spitting out water as he took a shaky breath. Relief washed over Emily as she leaned back on her heels, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Paramedics arrived shortly afterward, having fought through traffic to reach the scene. They loaded Daniel onto a stretcher and whisked him away to the nearest hospital, where doctors would monitor him closely. Meanwhile, Emily remained on the beach, catching her breath and trying to process what had just happened. Bystanders clapped and cheered, thanking her profusely for her quick thinking and bravery. One woman even hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Despite the gratitude surrounding her, Emily couldn't shake the nagging thought that her actions might have consequences. She had acted instinctively, driven by years of medical training and a desire to help. Yet she couldn't ignore the possibility that her decision to intervene could raise questions about protocol and procedure. After all, she hadn't been on duty that day, It had been her time off. Would anyone understand? Or would they see her actions differently? For now, though, Emily pushed those worries aside. She gathered her things and walked back to her car, her mind replaying the events over and over again. Saving Daniel's life had been the right thing to do, that much she was certain of. As she drove home, she allowed herself a small smile, knowing that somewhere out there a stranger was alive because of her. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was proud of what she had done. Saving Daniel's life had been the most meaningful thing she'd experienced in a long time. But on the other hand, a gnawing sense of unease lingered in the back of her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about whether her actions would be seen as stepping out of line. After all, she hadn't been at work when it happened. It had been her day off, and she wasn't officially on duty. Would anyone understand that she had simply followed her instincts? She got ready for work as usual, tying her hair back into a neat ponytail and slipping into her scrubs. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital felt longer than normal, every red light making her stomach twist with anxiety. When she finally arrived, she noticed that people were looking at her differently. Some nurses smiled warmly, whispering to each other as she passed by. Others avoided eye contact altogether, their expressions unreadable. Something was off. As soon as she stepped into the break room to clock in, her supervisor approached her. "Emily," he said, his tone serious. "Mr. Jenkins wants to see you in his office right away." The name sent a chill down her spine. Mr. Harold Jenkins was the hospital administrator, a man known for being strict and unyielding when it came to rules. Emily nodded nervously, trying to keep her voice steady. "Okay, I'll head there now." Walking down the hallway toward Jenkins' office felt like walking to a courtroom. Each step echoed loudly in her ears and her palms grew clammy. When she reached the door, she knocked softly before entering. Jenkins sat behind his large wooden desk, his face stern and unreadable. Beside him stood another man she didn't recognize, dressed in a suit and holding a clipboard. The atmosphere was tense, almost suffocating. "Have a seat, Miss Dawson," Jenkins said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Emily obeyed, clutching her hands together tightly in her lap. For a moment, no one spoke. Jenkins stared at her, his piercing gaze making her feel smaller than she already did. Finally, he broke the silence. "I'm sure you're aware why we've called you here today." Emily hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Is this about yesterday?" she asked cautiously. Jenkins nodded, leaning forward slightly. "Yes, Ms. Dawson. It has come to our attention that you performed CPR on a tourist at Lake Michigan during your scheduled day off. While your intentions may have been noble, you acted outside the scope of your employment without proper authorization." Emily blinked, taken aback by his words. "But it was an emergency," she protested, her voice rising slightly. "He wasn't breathing. I didn't have time to think about permissions or protocols. I just knew I had to help him." The man in the suit cleared his throat, glancing down at his clipboard. "That may be true, Ms. Dawson, but policies exist for a reason. By leaving your post, even though it was your day off, you put yourself in a position where liability becomes a concern for the hospital. We cannot overlook such actions, regardless of the outcome." Emily felt her heart sink. How could they not see that saving someone's life was more important than paperwork? She tried again, her voice trembling with frustration. "I didn't leave my post. I wasn't even supposed to be working. I was just being a person, a human being who saw someone in trouble and did what I could to help. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" Jenkins sighed heavily, folding his hands on the desk. "Ms. Dawson, I understand your perspective, but these are the rules. And unfortunately, due to the circumstances, we have no choice but to suspend you pending further investigation." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Suspended? For doing the right thing? She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Instead, she nodded numbly, too stunned to say anything else. Jenkins handed her a formal letter outlining the suspension, and she accepted it without looking at it. As she left the office, she felt like everyone in the hallway was watching her, judging her. Back in the break room, Emily sank onto a bench, staring blankly at the wall. Her mind raced with questions. What would happen next? Would this go on her record? Could she lose her job over something she didn't even plan to do? The thought of losing everything she had worked so hard for made her chest tighten. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let herself cry in front of her coworkers. Later that afternoon, news of Emily's suspension began to spread. Word traveled quickly through the hospital, and soon enough it reached the local media. Someone, Emily didn't know who, had shared videos of her performing CPR on Daniel at the beach. The footage showed her determination, her focus, and the sheer exhaustion etched on her face as she worked tirelessly to save his life. Within hours, the story went viral online, sparking outrage among viewers. Social media platforms lit up with posts supporting Emily. People praised her quick thinking and bravery, calling her a hero. Hashtags like "Justice for Emily" and "Shocking Heroes Deserve Better" trended on Twitter, drawing attention from news outlets across the city. Reporters began reaching out to the hospital for comment, demanding answers about why a nurse who saved a life was being punished instead of celebrated. At first, Emily didn't realize how big the story had become. She spent the rest of the day at home, curled up on her couch, replaying the meeting with Jenkins in her head. She barely noticed her phone buzzing constantly with notifications until curiosity finally got the better of her. Picking it up, she scrolled through dozens of messages from friends, family, and even strangers expressing their support. One message caught her eye, a video clip of herself performing CPR, accompanied by a caption that read, "This is what a real hero looks like." Tears filled her eyes as she watched the comments pouring in. Thousands of people were rallying behind her, defending her actions and criticizing the hospital's decision. For the first time since the suspension, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wouldn't ruin her career after all. Maybe, just maybe, the public outcry would force the hospital to reconsider. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter was recovering in another hospital, unaware of the storm brewing around Emily's suspension. He had woken up groggy and disoriented, piecing together fragments of what had happened to him. Nurses explained that he had nearly drowned but was brought back thanks to the efforts of a bystander. Grateful beyond words, Daniel asked if anyone knew who had saved him. When he learned it was a nurse named Emily Dawson, he insisted on finding a way to thank her personally. A few days later, Daniel gave an interview to a local news station, still weak but determined to share his gratitude. Sitting upright in his hospital bed, he looked directly into the camera. "I don't remember much about what happened," he admitted, "but I do know one thing for sure. If it weren't for Emily Dawson, I wouldn't be here today. She saved my life, and I owe her everything." His heartfelt words struck a chord with viewers, adding fuel to the growing movement supporting Emily. Calls and emails flooded the hospital administration, urging them to reverse their decision. Even some of Emily's colleagues started speaking out, arguing that punishing her for acting selflessly went against everything the medical profession stood for. Despite the overwhelming support, Emily remained cautious. She knew hospitals operated differently from the court of public opinion. Policies were policies, and changing them, even under pressure, wouldn't be easy. Still, she couldn't deny the warmth she felt knowing that so many people believed in her. For the first time since the suspension, she allowed herself to imagine a future where things might turn out okay. As the days passed, the controversy only grew louder. Journalists dug deeper into the hospital's policies, questioning whether they were fair or outdated. Legal experts weighed in, debating whether Emily's actions fell within the boundaries of Good Samaritan laws designed to protect those who intervened in emergencies. Meanwhile, petitions circulated online, gathering tens of thousands of signatures demanding justice for Emily. Through it all, Emily stayed quiet, letting others speak on her behalf. She returned to work briefly to collect her belongings from her locker, keeping her head down as reporters camped outside the hospital entrance. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust toward her face, and questions flew at her from every direction. But Emily refused to engage, politely declining interviews and retreating to the safety of her car. It wasn't until later that night, sitting alone in her apartment, that Emily truly processed everything that had happened. She thought about Daniel lying unconscious on the beach and how close he had come to dying. She thought about the countless lives she had touched as a nurse, the patients she had cared for, and the sacrifices she had made along the way. And she thought about the irony of being punished for doing exactly what she had dedicated her life to, saving others. For now, there was nothing she could do but wait. Wait for the hospital to make a decision. Wait for the media frenzy to die down. Wait to see if justice or fairness would prevail. But deep down, Emily knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't change a single thing about what she had done that day. Saving Daniel's life had been worth it, no matter the cost. The days that followed Emily's suspension were a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, the overwhelming support from the public gave her a sense of hope and validation. Strangers sent her messages of encouragement, thanking her for her bravery and reminding her that she had done the right thing. Friends and family called constantly, offering words of comfort and assuring her that justice would prevail. But on the other hand, the uncertainty of her situation weighed heavily on her mind. Would the hospital stand by its decision? Would her career be tarnished forever? These questions haunted her every waking moment. Emily tried to keep herself busy, filling her days with small tasks to distract herself from the chaos swirling around her. She cleaned her apartment until it sparkled, rearranged furniture she hadn't touched in years, and even started baking, a hobby she hadn't attempted since college. The scent of freshly baked cookies filled her kitchen, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. Every time her phone buzzed or the doorbell rang, her heart skipped a beat, wondering if it was news about her case. Meanwhile, the media frenzy showed no signs of slowing down. Reporters camped outside St. Mary's Hospital, demanding statements from administrators and interviewing anyone willing to talk. Some nurses spoke out in defense of Emily, sharing stories of her dedication and kindness. Others remained silent, afraid of backlash from the hospital. News outlets aired segments featuring experts debating the ethics of punishing someone for performing CPR during an emergency. Legal analysts argued that Good Samaritan laws should protect people like Emily, while others pointed out that hospitals had their own set of rules to follow. Amid the noise, Daniel Carter continued his recovery at another hospital. He watched the news coverage closely, growing increasingly frustrated with how Emily was being treated. To him, the answer seemed simple. She had saved his life, plain and simple. How could anyone punish her for that? Determined to make his voice heard, Daniel reached out to journalists, offering to share his side of the story. His interview quickly went viral, tugging at the heartstrings of viewers across the country. "I don't care about policies or procedures," Daniel said during the interview, his voice trembling with emotion. "All I care about is that Emily Dawson didn't hesitate when she saw me lying there, unconscious and drowning. She acted selflessly, without thinking about herself, or what might happen to her later. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't be here talking to you today." His words resonated deeply with the public, reigniting calls for the hospital to reverse its decision. Social media exploded once again, with users flooding comment sections and tagging St. Mary's Hospital in posts demanding accountability. Even local politicians joined the conversation, urging the hospital administration to reconsider its stance. The pressure mounted daily, leaving Mr. Harold Jenkins and his team scrambling to respond. Back at St. Mary's, tensions ran high among the staff. Nurses whispered in hallways, divided between those who supported Emily and those who feared speaking out against management. Some openly criticized Jenkins's handling of the situation, arguing that punishing Emily sent the wrong message not only to employees but also to the community. Others defended the hospital's position, insisting that rules existed for a reason and couldn't be bent simply because of public opinion. Jenkins himself felt the weight of the controversy bearing down on him. As the face of the hospital, he faced relentless scrutiny from reporters and angry citizens alike. Phone calls poured into his office, some praising his commitment to upholding policies, and others accusing him of cruelty and incompetence. Emails flooded his inbox, many containing threats of boycotts or legal action if the suspension wasn't lifted immediately. For the first time in his career, Jenkins found himself questioning whether he had made the right call. One evening, as Jenkins sat alone in his dimly lit office reviewing documents related to Emily's case, there was a knock at the door. Startled, he looked up to see Dr. Margaret Collins standing in the doorway. A tall, imposing woman with sharp features and an authoritative presence, Dr. Collins was not someone to be taken lightly. As the regional director of healthcare services, she oversaw multiple hospitals in the area and had a reputation for fairness and integrity. Her sudden appearance caught Jenkins off guard. "Dr. Collins," he stammered, rising from his chair, "I wasn't expecting you." "That much is clear," she replied dryly, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "Do you have a moment to discuss Ms. Dawson's suspension?" Jenkins hesitated before nodding. "Of course, please have a seat." Dr. Collins took a chair across from him, setting a leather folder on the desk. She studied him carefully, her piercing gaze making him squirm. "I've been following the developments closely," she began. "And frankly, I'm concerned about the direction this has taken. Tell me, Harold, what exactly led to your decision to suspend Ms. Dawson?" Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, Dr. Collins, as you know, protocol dictates that employees must act within the scope of their duties. While Ms. Dawson's actions were commendable, she performed CPR outside of her scheduled hours without proper authorization. We can't overlook such violations regardless of the outcome." Dr. Collins raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying that saving a man's life constitutes a violation worthy of suspension?" "It's not about the act itself," Jenkins explained, hastily. "It's about maintaining consistency and accountability. If we start bending the rules for one person, where do we draw the line?" Dr. Collins leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Let me ask you something, Harold. What message does this send to your staff and to the public? Do you really want to be known as the hospital that punishes heroes instead of celebrating them?" Her question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Jenkins opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again, unsure of what to say. Dr. Collins pressed on. "I flew here personally because I believe this situation requires careful consideration. Public trust is fragile, and incidents like this can damage a hospital's reputation irreparably. Have you spoken directly with Ms. Dawson about her perspective?" Jenkins shook his head. "Not yet. I thought it best to handle things through formal channels." Dr. Collins sighed, clearly exasperated. "That's part of the problem, Harold. You're treating this like a legal matter rather than a human one. Policies are important, yes, but so is compassion. If you lose sight of that, you risk alienating both your employees and the community." With that, she stood up and handed him a document from her folder. "This outlines my recommendations moving forward. I suggest you review it carefully and consider revisiting your decision. In the meantime, I'd like to meet with Ms. Dawson myself. Where can I find her?" Jenkins hesitated, then scribbled down Emily's contact information. As Dr. Collins turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Remember, Harold, people will forget what you said. They'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Don't let this become a lesson in poor leadership." Once Dr. Collins left, Jenkins sat staring at the document in front of him, his mind racing. He knew she was right. The situation had spiraled far beyond anything he had anticipated. The hospital's reputation was on the line, and the eyes of the entire city were watching. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder if suspending Emily had been the wrong move. Later that day, Dr. Collins arrived at Emily's apartment. Knocking gently on the door, she waited patiently until Emily answered, looking surprised to see her visitor. "Dr. Collins?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with confusion. "What are you doing here?" "I came to speak with you," Dr. Collins replied kindly. "May I come in?" Emily nodded, stepping aside to let her enter. They sat down in the living room, and Dr. Collins wasted no time getting to the point. "Ms. Dawson, I've reviewed your case thoroughly, and I want to hear your side of the story. Tell me, in your own words, what happened that day." Emily recounted the events at Lake Michigan, her voice steady despite the lump forming in her throat. She described seeing Daniel lying motionless on the sand. the panic of the crowd and the urgency she felt as she began CPR. She explained how she hadn't stopped to think about consequences or protocols. She had simply acted because it was the right thing to do. When she finished, Dr. Collins nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for sharing that with me. It takes courage to put yourself in harm's way for someone else, especially when you know it might cost you personally. I assure you, your actions have not gone unnoticed." Emily blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the sincerity in Dr. Collins's voice. "I just don't understand why helping someone could lead to this," she admitted quietly. "I didn't break any laws. I followed my training. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" Dr. Collins smiled faintly. "You're absolutely right. And rest assured, I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure this situation is resolved fairly. Sometimes, systems need to adapt to reflect humanity rather than suppress it." As they talked further, Emily felt a glimmer of hope returning. For the first time since the suspension, she believed that maybe, just maybe, things would work out after all. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling a little lighter than she had in days. Her conversation with Dr. Collins had given her hope, something she desperately needed after weeks of uncertainty and stress. She replayed their discussion in her mind, focusing on the words of encouragement and reassurance that Dr. Collins had offered. For the first time since the suspension, Emily allowed herself to imagine a future where she could return to work without fear or shame. Still, she knew better than to get her hopes up too high. The hospital administration was stubborn, and changing their minds wouldn't be easy. Meanwhile, Dr. Margaret Collins arrived at St. Mary's Hospital early that day, determined to address the growing controversy surrounding Emily Dawson. She requested an emergency meeting with Mr. Harold Jenkins and other senior staff members, including the hospital's legal team and board representatives. The conference room buzzed with tension as everyone filed in, sensing that this meeting would be pivotal. Dr. Collins wasted no time getting to the point. "Let's cut straight to the heart of the matter," she began, standing at the head of the table. "Ms. Dawson's suspension has become a national story, and it's reflecting poorly on this institution. People are questioning whether St. Mary's values compassion over bureaucracy, and frankly, they have every right to ask that question." Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at the others around the table. Some nodded in agreement while others avoided eye contact altogether. Dr. Collins continued, her tone firm but measured. "I've reviewed the details of the case, spoken with Ms. Dawson personally, and examined the policies under which she was suspended. While I understand the importance of maintaining protocol, I believe we must also recognize when exceptions are warranted, especially in situations involving life and death decisions." One of the board members cleared his throat, leaning forward slightly. "Dr. Collins, I appreciate your perspective, but we can't ignore the fact that Ms. Dawson acted outside the scope of her employment. If we start bending the rules for one person, it sets a dangerous precedent." "That's a valid concern," Dr. Collins replied calmly. "But let's look at the bigger picture here. This isn't just about one employee breaking a rule. It's about how we, as leaders in healthcare, respond to acts of selflessness and courage. Punishing someone for saving a life sends a message that compliance is more important than humanity. Is that really the image we want to project?" The room fell silent as her words sank in. Another board member spoke up hesitantly. "What do you propose we do then? Reverse the suspension and risk undermining our authority?" Dr. Collins shook her head. "Not necessarily. What I'm suggesting is a balanced approach, one that acknowledges the extraordinary nature of this situation while reinforcing the importance of policy. We can lift the suspension, issue a formal apology to Ms. Dawson, and use this incident as an opportunity to revisit our guidelines. Perhaps it's time to implement clearer protections for employees who act as good Samaritans during emergencies." Her suggestion sparked a lively debate among the group. Some argued that revising policies would open the door to abuse, while others agreed that the current system was outdated and needed reform. Jenkins listened quietly, his expression unreadable. He had always prided himself on running a tight ship, but now he found himself questioning whether his rigid adherence to rules had cost him the trust of his staff and the community. After nearly 2 hours of discussion, Dr. Collins brought the conversation back to its central theme. At the end of the day, our mission is to serve others. That means not only treating patients within these walls, but also empowering our employees to make ethical choices, even when they're off duty. If we fail to support Ms. Dawson, we risk alienating not only her, but also countless others who might find themselves in similar situations. Finally, Jenkins sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "You're right," he admitted reluctantly. "We've mishandled this from the beginning. It's time to make things right." With that, the board agreed to overturn Emily's suspension and issue a public apology. They also decided to form a task force to review existing policies and develop new ones that would protect employees acting as good Samaritans. Though some members remained skeptical, the majority recognized the need for change, not just for Emily's sake, but for the hospital's reputation and future. Later that afternoon, Jenkins called Emily into his office once again. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. Instead of sternness and accusation, there was a sense of humility in the air. Jenkins gestured for her to sit, his demeanor noticeably softer than before. "Ms. Dawson," he began, clearing his throat. "First and foremost, I want to apologize for everything. You acted heroically, and I failed to acknowledge that. My focus on procedure blinded me to the bigger picture, and for that I am truly sorry." Emily stared at him, unsure of what to say. She hadn't expected an apology, let alone one so sincere. After a moment, she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means a lot." Jenkins went on to explain the board's decision to lift her suspension and revise hospital policies. He assured her that she would face no further repercussions and encouraged her to continue doing what she loved most, caring for others. By the time the meeting ended, Emily felt a weight lifting off her shoulders, though she knew the road ahead wouldn't be entirely smooth. News of the reversal spread quickly, thanks to a press release issued by the hospital later that evening. In it, Jenkins publicly apologized to Emily and praised her for her bravery. He also announced the formation of the task force aimed at improving policies related to emergency interventions. The statement received widespread praise, with many applauding the hospital for listening to public feedback and taking steps toward meaningful change. For Emily, the apology marked the beginning of a new chapter. Friends and family celebrated the news, showering her with hugs and messages of support. Strangers reached out online, sharing stories of their own experiences with Good Samaritan acts and thanking her for inspiring them to speak out against injustice. Even Daniel Carter, still recovering in another hospital, sent her a heartfelt note expressing his gratitude once again. Despite the positivity surrounding her, Emily couldn't help but reflect on the lessons she had learned throughout this ordeal. She realized that standing up for what was right often came with challenges, but those challenges could lead to growth and change, not just for individuals, but for entire systems. Her actions had sparked a conversation about compassion versus compliance, forcing people to reevaluate their priorities and consider how they wanted to be remembered. As the days passed, life began to return to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible. Emily resumed her duties at St. Mary's, greeted warmly by co-workers who admired her resilience. Patients thanked her for her care, unaware of the battle she had fought outside the hospital walls. Reporters stopped calling, and the media frenzy gradually faded away, leaving behind a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as Emily prepared dinner in her apartment, there was a knock at the door. Opening it, she was surprised to see Daniel Carter standing there, leaning on a cane for support. His face lit up with a smile as he extended a bouquet of flowers toward her. "I know it's late," he said sheepishly, "but I couldn't leave Chicago without saying thank you in person." Emily blinked back tears, accepting the flowers with trembling hands. "Daniel, you didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," he interrupted gently. "You saved my life, Emily. There's no way I could ever repay you for that. But if there's anything I can do to help, from speaking at hospitals to sharing your story, I'm here." They spent the next hour talking, laughing, and reflecting on the events that had brought them together. For Emily, it was a reminder of why she had chosen nursing in the first place: to make a difference, no matter how small or large. As Daniel left, promising to stay in touch, Emily stood in her doorway watching him walk away. In that moment, she realized that sometimes doing the right thing wasn't just about saving lives. It was about inspiring others to see the world differently. And for Emily Dawson, that was a victory worth celebrating. The weeks that followed the reversal of Emily's suspension were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. While the hospital worked to implement new policies, Emily found herself at the center of a growing movement. People across the city, and even beyond, were using her story as an example of how compassion should always outweigh bureaucracy. Nurses, doctors, and other healthcare workers began sharing their own experiences of going above and beyond for patients, often without recognition or reward. For many, Emily's courage had sparked a much-needed conversation about the challenges faced by those in caregiving professions. At St. Mary's Hospital, the newly formed task force held its first meeting to review existing protocols. Chaired by Dr. Margaret Collins, the group included representatives from various departments, legal advisors, and even a few patient advocates. Their goal was clear: create guidelines that would protect employees who acted as good Samaritans during emergencies. Both on and off duty, the discussions were intense but productive, with members debating everything from liability concerns to the scope of acceptable interventions. Emily attended one of these meetings, invited by Dr. Collins to share her perspective. Sitting among professionals she respected deeply, she felt both honored and nervous. As the conversation turned to real-life scenarios, she spoke candidly about her experience at Lake Michigan, the fear, the exhaustion, and the overwhelming sense of responsibility she had felt. Her words resonated with the group, reminding them that behind every policy decision were human lives being impacted. "I didn't stop to think about rules or consequences," Emily said quietly. "I just knew someone needed help and I couldn't walk away. That's what we're trained to do, to care for others no matter what." Her honesty struck a chord, prompting nods of agreement around the table. One of the senior nurses leaned forward, her voice filled with admiration. "What Emily did reminds us why we chose this profession. We're not just following orders, we're saving lives. And sometimes that means stepping outside the box." As the task force continued its work, Emily returned to her routine at the hospital, feeling more empowered than ever before. Colleagues greeted her warmly, some stopping to thank her for standing up and making a difference. Patients noticed the change too. There was a renewed sense of energy and purpose in the halls of St. Mary's. It was as if Emily's actions had ignited a spark, reminding everyone of the importance of empathy and humanity in their daily work. Outside the hospital, Emily's story continued to inspire. Local news outlets featured updates on the policy changes underway, highlighting her role in sparking reform. Social media remained abuzz with praise for her bravery, and petitions advocating for stronger protections for Good Samaritans gained thousands of signatures nationwide. Even schools began incorporating her story into lessons about civic responsibility and moral courage, encouraging students to think critically about how they could make a difference in their communities. One day, as Emily walked through the park near her apartment, she overheard two women talking on a bench. One of them mentioned her name, describing how Emily's actions had restored her faith in humanity. Smiling to herself, Emily realized just how far her influence had spread. What had started as a single act of kindness had grown into something much larger, a catalyst for positive change. But amidst all the attention, Emily remained humble. She never sought recognition or fame. She simply wanted to do her job and live her life quietly. Still, she understood the value of using her platform to advocate for others. When asked to speak at a regional nursing conference, she agreed, knowing it was an opportunity to amplify the voices of those who often went unheard. On the day of the conference, Emily stood nervously behind the podium, looking out at a sea of faces eager to hear her story. Taking a deep breath, she began by recounting the events at Lake Michigan, painting a vivid picture of the chaos and urgency she had faced. But instead of focusing solely on herself, she shifted the narrative to highlight the broader issues affecting healthcare workers. "We're taught to follow rules, and rightfully so. They exist to keep us safe and ensure consistency, she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. But when those rules conflict with our instincts to help, we have to ask ourselves, what truly matters? Is it ticking boxes and avoiding liability, or is it doing whatever it takes to save a life? The audience listened intently, hanging on her every word. Some nodded in agreement while others scribbled notes furiously. Emily paused briefly, glancing down at her notes before continuing. I'm not saying policies aren't important. They absolutely are. But they shouldn't come at the cost of compassion. If we lose sight of why we entered this field to care for people, then we risk losing ourselves in the process. Her speech ended with a standing ovation, leaving many attendees visibly moved. Afterward, dozens of nurses approached her to express their gratitude, sharing stories of their own struggles and triumphs. One young nurse, fresh out of training, tearfully thanked Emily for giving her hope during a difficult time in her career. You've shown me that it's okay to trust my instincts, the woman said. That means more to me than you'll ever know. As the conference wrapped up, Emily felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Though the past few months had been challenging, they had also been transformative. She had grown as a person, learning to navigate adversity with grace and resilience. More importantly, she had discovered the power of community, the way people could come together to support one another and drive meaningful change. Back home, Emily reflected on how much her life had changed since that fateful day at the beach. From the initial shock of her suspension to the overwhelming support she received from strangers, each step of the journey had shaped her in ways she never anticipated. She thought about Daniel Carter, whose recovery was progressing steadily, and smiled at the memory of their heartfelt reunion. His gratitude had reminded her of the ripple effect a single act of kindness could create. Even Mr. Harold Jenkins seemed different now. Gone was the stern administrator who prioritized rules over relationships. In his place was a man willing to listen, learn, and adapt, a leader determined to restore trust within his institution. During a chance encounter in the hallway, he stopped Emily to thank her once again for her patience and perseverance. You've taught us all a valuable lesson, he admitted. Sometimes doing the right thing requires taking a leap of faith. Though the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, Emily felt confident in her ability to face whatever challenges lay in store. She had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, armed with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper appreciation for the impact one person could have. Whether through her work at the hospital, her advocacy efforts, or simply the way she carried herself, Emily knew she would continue to inspire others to embrace compassion and courage in their own lives. As she sat by her window that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emily allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Life was unpredictable, full of twists and turns that tested even the strongest among us. But it was also beautiful, brimming with opportunities to connect, heal, and grow. And for Emily Dawson, that was enough. Months passed, and the changes Emily's actions had inspired began to take root. St. Mary's Hospital officially unveiled its new policy protecting employees who acted as good Samaritans during emergencies. The guidelines were clear yet flexible, designed to empower healthcare workers to make ethical decisions without fear of punishment. It was named the Dawson Protocol, a title that made Emily blush every time she heard it. Though she never sought recognition, she couldn't deny the pride she felt knowing her story had paved the way for meaningful reform. The hospital also launched an initiative called Compassion in Action, aimed at fostering a culture of empathy and accountability. Workshops, seminars, and team-building exercises became regular parts of the staff schedule, encouraging everyone to reflect on their roles as caregivers. Posters with motivational quotes lined the walls of the break rooms, reminding employees why they chose this demanding but rewarding profession. One poster read simply, "Rules guide us, but compassion defines us." Emily often found herself smiling whenever she walked past it. Life at the hospital returned to its usual rhythm, though it felt lighter somehow. Nurses joked more freely. In the hallways, doctors lingered a little longer with patients, and even the administrative staff seemed friendlier. There was a sense of unity, a shared understanding that they were all part of something bigger than themselves. Emily noticed these small shifts daily, each one reinforcing her belief that change, no matter how gradual, was possible. Outside of work, Emily continued to embrace her role as an advocate for compassionate care. Invitations poured in from organizations across the country asking her to speak at conferences, schools, and community events. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she was the right person for such a responsibility. But after seeing the impact her words had on others, she accepted the invitations, viewing them as opportunities to keep the conversation going. One evening, Emily traveled to a small town in Indiana to address a group of high school students studying health sciences. Standing before the eager teenagers, she shared not only her story, but also practical advice about staying true to one's values in challenging situations. "You don't have to be perfect," she told them. "You just have to care. That's what people will remember. The kindness you show and the effort you put into making someone's day better." Afterward, a shy girl approached her, clutching a notebook tightly against her chest. "I want to be a nurse someday," the girl said softly. "But I'm scared I'll mess up or get in trouble like you did. What should I do?" Emily knelt down so she could look the girl in the eye. "Being scared is normal. It means you care. But don't let fear stop you from trying. If you focus on helping others, everything else will fall into place. Trust me. I've been there." The girl smiled, her face lighting up with determination. As Emily watched her walk away, she realized once again how powerful encouragement could be. A few kind words, spoken at the right moment, could shape someone's future. Back in Chicago, Daniel Carter's recovery reached a major milestone. After weeks of physical therapy, he was finally able to walk without assistance. Grateful for his second chance at life, he decided to give back by volunteering at a local water safety program. He reached out to Emily, inviting her to join him for a special event where participants would learn CPR and other life-saving skills. "I owe you my life," Daniel said when they met at the event. "Now I want to pay it forward, and maybe teach others how to save someone like you saved me." Together, they spent the afternoon teaching attendees the importance of quick thinking and teamwork in emergencies. Watching Daniel interact with the crowd, Emily marveled at how far he had come since that chaotic day at Lake Michigan. His gratitude remained unwavering, and his enthusiasm was contagious. By the end of the day, dozens of people had learned valuable skills they might one day use to help someone in need. As autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and vibrant colors to the city, Emily took stock of her journey. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the suspension, the media frenzy, the uncertainty, and how they had ultimately led her to a place of growth and fulfillment. Her experience had taught her resilience, humility, and the importance of standing firm in her convictions. Most importantly, it had shown her the incredible power of community. One crisp Saturday morning, Emily received an unexpected invitation in the mail. It was from Dr. Margaret Collins, who had played such a pivotal role in resolving her case. Inside the envelope was a formal letter requesting her presence at a regional healthcare summit in Washington, D.C. The event would bring together leaders from hospitals, universities, and advocacy groups to discuss ways to improve patient care nationwide. Emily's name had been specifically recommended as a guest speaker. At first, Emily doubted whether she belonged among such distinguished professionals. But then she remembered something Dr. Collins had once told her. "Your voice matters because it comes from experience. People listen not because of titles, but because of truth." With that in mind, she accepted the invitation, determined to share her insights and inspire others to prioritize compassion in their work. The summit proved to be a transformative experience. Over 3 days, Emily connected with individuals from diverse backgrounds, exchanging ideas and stories that broadened her perspective. During her presentation, she spoke passionately about the intersection of policy and humanity, urging attendees to consider the real-world implications of their decisions. Her speech earned a standing ovation, cementing her status as a respected figure in the healthcare community. By the time Emily returned to Chicago, she felt invigorated and ready to tackle whatever came next. Her advocacy efforts gained momentum, leading to partnerships with national organizations focused on improving working conditions for healthcare workers. She collaborated with lawmakers to draft legislation expanding protections for Good Samaritans, ensuring that others wouldn't face the same struggles she had endured. Through it all, Emily remained grounded, never losing sight of why she started this journey. She cherished quiet moments at home, sipping tea while watching the sunset, grateful for the simple joys life offered. Friends often teased her about becoming a celebrity, but Emily shrugged it off. To her, fame was irrelevant. What mattered most was making a difference, however small. On a chilly December evening, Emily attended the hospital's annual holiday party. The room buzzed with laughter and cheer as staff members exchanged gifts and shared memories from the past year. When Mr. Jenkins took the stage to deliver his closing remarks, he surprised everyone by calling Emily to join him. "Before we wrap up tonight," he began, "I'd like to take a moment to thank someone who has changed our hospital and our lives for the better. Emily Dawson, please come up here." Nervously, Emily stepped onto the stage, greeted by thunderous applause. Jenkins handed her a framed certificate declaring her Employee of the Year, along with a bouquet of flowers. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked out at the sea of smiling faces. "This award isn't just for me," she said, her voice trembling. "It's for all of you, for believing in me, supporting me, and reminding me why we do what we do. Let's keep fighting for compassion, for fairness, and for the people who depend on us. Together we can make a difference." As the crowd erupted into cheers, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. She had weathered storms, faced doubts, and emerged stronger than ever. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And as she stood there, surrounded by colleagues who had become family, she knew one thing for certain: compassion always wins.